Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Jana Suarez. I'd like to begin by asking a question, but listen closely because it has a few parts. So please raise your hand if you enjoy traveling. Keep your hand raised if you have ever journaled while you traveled. Those of you with your hand still raised, keep your hand raised again if you'd like to come up and help me give this talk. Oh, well, thank you all for participating anyway. So my title of my talk is Traveling, Pack a Journal. As MBAs, we know that when we decide to travel, it's a big investment in both time and money. As MBAs, we should be concerned about our return on investment. And I think the best way to maximize our return on investment is to journal when we travel. Now you might disagree and say, I can maximize ROI by taking photographs and videos of my trips or buying souvenirs. I'll remember everything I did. Okay, well, that's a fair argument, but I'd also like to argue that you should also keep in mind ROE, and I'm gonna call this return on experience. To maximize your return on experience, I think the best way is to reflect on that, and the best way to do this is to keep a journal. For the purposes of this presentation, I will define a travel journal as a record of news of events of a journey. Simply put, and as examples, it could be as simple as a diary, an online blog, or even social media posts. I'm going to take you on a journey of how I started on the topic of travel journals and where it all began. So back in 6th grade, I had a teacher who learned that I was going on a family trip to India. He encouraged me to keep a journal so that I could share my experiences when I got back and he would read it. What started off as a class assignment turned into a tradition. And the 4 years later, and then the 8 years later after that I went back to India, I used that same journal and documented my experiences. Now I learned a few things from this particular journal when I go back and read it. The first is that my handwriting really changed. The second is that my voice changed. Okay, not in a literal sense, maybe in a literal sense as well, but figuratively, my writer's voice changed. What I mean by this is that journaling is a great way to measure your growth. As a writer, I learned that I started to focus away from just details and small experiences to really thinking about how I would frame a story of my travels so that I could really remember that when I got older. The next type of journal I kept was on a homestay in Japan. I lived with the host family for a month during high school, and I had an opportunity to attend school there. I had 2 host sisters, and the experiences that I captured each day, this was a very dedicated journal. I made sure to reflect each night because I wanted to maximize those experiences. When I go back and read this journal, I'm reminded of the different types of culture shock that I faced, the cool traditions I learned, and all those experiences that I might not remember when I look back at photos and videos now. The third type of journal I kept was on a service trip in Chicago in college. This particular reflection journal is, we went as a group, and at the end of the night, we would take 10 to 15 minutes to reflect on our day. We were volunteering at a homeless shelter and at an elementary school with children. So you can imagine kind of being faced in highly emotionally charged situations, and just taking time at the end of the day to reflect on those experiences was very important. The most recent type of journal I kept was in the form of an online blog last year when I was in Australia. I was doing research there, and I also had the opportunity to do a lot of sightseeing. I opted for an online blog because I wanted to share my experiences with family and friends back home. Blogging is a great way because it adds versatility. You can add photographs and add captions to them and then share your stories with your family and friends. Now, I mentioned briefly how I think social media does play a role in how we can document our travels. And so if any of you guys have Facebook or Instagram, this is a great place to start. I mentioned a bunch of reasons why I recommended a travel journal, and I'd just like to explain a few more. When you opt for a traditional diary, like of some of the examples I've shown you before, it offers you the experience of personalizing them. So I've gone back, I've drawn in my journals. When you find those train tickets and the plane tickets, the stickers, stamps, and those little brochures you pick up at museums, and you go back home and you know they're just not worthy enough to stick in a showcase, but they're a step above just throwing them out in the trash, you can add it to your journal, and it also becomes like a scrapbook later on. Additionally, we know that through tradition, stories are passed along, or they began being passed along through an oral tradition. When we discovered ability to write, we started to do written tradition as well. We are now in the age of modern technology, and I feel like we've kind of lost our way in terms of writing about our experiences. While we do have technology and it's a great supplement, we might opt for photos or videos because it is just easier to capture those stories in the moment. However, there is something to be said about reflecting on our experiences and translating our experiences into a written word. Journals are a great way and a great gift to share with the future generations, so don't let it be a lost art. The last reason I recommend a travel journal is because a picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes you will forget what those 1,000 words are when you look back. This particular picture is of Wedding Cake Rock, which is a popular hiking destination just outside of Sydney. And 50 years from now, if I didn't take the time to document this, that's probably all I would remember too. However, the backstory of this is that it was actually a little bit more of an adventure than I anticipated being on. I was hiking with 2 friends and it had just rained, but we did not expect it to be as muddy as it was. So we walked through these muddy trenches, which would have been fun had it not been raining, because they were just wooden planks that you could walk across. And on the way, we saw a snake at one point, we saw some wildlife, these giant red ants, but also were mesmerized by the beautiful coastlines and sandstone rocks that we saw. We finally ended up at Wedding Cake Rock, and now it's a story that I'm able to tell. But just think about the stories that you might be forgetting if you don't take the time to journal them in the moment. Which brings me to how you can start your own travel journal. I've mentioned opting for a traditional journal. I've also mentioned thinking about an online blog or social media. The best way to supplement this is to take videos because we have the opportunity to now with modern technology. Also take photographs, but also keep detailed notes. And I like to do this when I'm traveling by using the Notes app on my phone, especially if you go on tours and you want to remember the details that the tour guide's telling you, those really funny stories or those details that you know you won't remember unless you've taken notes in the moment. You can quickly type it, jot it down in your phone, or if you have the book with you, write it down. But it makes for adding to those journal entries later on a lot easier. Finally, I'd just like to leave you with a quote. Traveling, it leaves you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller. Thank you.